Hi everyone, let's look today at the TV shaders and all the properties found in the TV shaders. And if you already use the Vegetation Engine, you might have seen that there are uh, a few shaders included for different purposes. For instance, the crop shader is used for static objects. The vegetation shaders are split in a few categories based on the features they have. For instance, we have the bark shader, which doesn't support subsurface scattering, but you can enable detail blending for moss blending, for example. We have the cross shaders, which are used for billboard shaders, but the simple ones, the cross billboards. We have the grass shaders, and we have the leaf shaders, which are used for all kind of foliage. And the leaf, grass, and cross shaders are always split in two categories. We have the standard lit shaders and the subsurface lit shaders. The only difference between them is that the subsurface lit shaders are always rendered in the forward path, and they support an accurate subsurface scattering, and the standard shaders are using a fake subsurface scattering, and they support deferred rendering. But we will see more about the subsurface scattering a bit later. One thing to note here is that in HDRP, both the standard lit and the subsurface lit shaders are supported in deferred rendering, but the standard lit is a bit cheaper to render because it doesn't support transmission using diffusion profiles. So let's jump in and look at the shader properties. The shader properties are the same on all the shaders, but the features are different based on the shader type. Let's start with the render settings. The render settings are quite similar to the standard Unity shaders, but they are named differently. The render mode, you can set the shader to opaque or transparent. In my opinion, transparency should only be used for particles and some visual effects, not for vegetation or props. Render faces. It controls how the faces are rendered. If only one of the faces are rendered, or both faces, so you have a double-sided shading. The render normals controls how the lighting is affecting the back faces. And if the render normals are set to same, both faces or both sides of the face are lit the same. And you can set it to flip or mirror. In this case, you won't see a big difference, but if you go to this grass shader, and if I set it to flip, the shading looks different. That really depends on the mesh normals, and I cannot tell you which one to use. Just go through all of them and see which one looks better. All right. Receive specular. If you see this metallic shading on the leaves, you might want to disable the specular highlights. And this is easy to do in the built-in or URP, because this receive specular was super easy to add. But it is not possible to do it in HDRP, unfortunately. The only way to do it is to go to the directional light and disable effect specular, but that will disable the specular highlights on all your crops and vegetation. They might add it in a future HDRP version, so let's hope we will have it at some point. All right, alpha clipping. This controls if the shader is is using alpha cutout or not, and the alpha threshold is controlling the alpha threshold. The fade by glancing angle will cut the faces based on the glancing angle. So on this tree, you see the, it's not super visible, but you see the actual planes and you see these crosses. If you use the glancing angle, this will cut those faces that are perpendicular to the camera view. And you can control the noise size by going to the global control, screen noise scale. All right, and the fade by distance fade. The faces are faded out based on the camera distance, and you can control the camera distance from the global control. If you want to fade out the bark shader as well, you will need to enable the alpha clipping on the bark shader, and now both shaders are faded out. If you want to control the noise scale, you will need to control the screen noise scale. Global settings. They were briefly covered in the Get Started tutorial. We saw that we can use layers to filter out the elements affecting the materials. We can choose if any of the global effects are affecting the material, and I want to cover the color mask and the overlay mask. So if I go to the global control and set the global alpha to 1, this will replace the material colors, and let's set it to red. If I go back to the material, using the color mask, we can control how much the leaves are affected based on the main mask blue channel. If you go to the blue channel, you will see that the leaves are white and the bark part is black. So in this case, you can control the mask, and if I set both handles to 0, the entire material will be affected by that global color. If you go to the grass shader, the grass shader is not using the blue mask, but a bottom mask. This is added because you might want to use color map elements to blend the grass with the terrain, and you can control to only affect the bottom part or the entire material, and you can set a color variation based on the variation baked in the mesh. If you go to global control and enable the global overlay, on the grass shader, you can control how much the overlay is affecting the material, and it is based on the albedo green channel, because a lot of assets from the store don't have a normal map, so I choose to use the albedo to control the overlay coverage, and same for the leaves material, and same for the bark. Under the main settings, we have the albedo texture, the normal map texture, and the main mask. The main mask is using 4 channels packed together for better performance. And let's go to the main mask and look at each channel. So the red channel is storing the metallic mask. The green channel is storing the ambient occlusion. The blue channel is storing a height mask for the props and the bark shader, and a subsurface mask for the leaves shader. And the alpha channel is the smoothness mask. And if we go back to the shader, we can control how much if any of these channels are affecting the material. So since the metallic mask is black, we cannot add any metallic to this shader. The main occlusion, which is stored in the green channel, is controlling the ambient occlusion, and the main smoothness is controlling the smoothness based on that alpha channel. The main UVs are used to set the texture tiling and the offset, and the main color is controlling the material color. The main normal is controlling the normal map scale. The bark and the props shaders have support for detail blending. If I enable the detail, I can control if the detail is replacing the main textures, or if the detail textures are overlaid over the main textures. In this case, I will leave it to replace. And we have the same textures found in the main settings. You can control the color, the normal scale, the occlusion intensity, the smoothness intensity, or if the main normal should be blended with the detail normal or not. The detail blending is controlled by 2 masks. The first mask is the texture mask stored in the blue channel, and you can use the main mask blue channel or the detail mask blue channel, and you can change it from the detail mask source. And if we go to the detail mask, in the blue channel, we can see this pattern, which is used to blend the detail on the bark. And the second mask is baked in the vertex color blue channel. In this case, it is a mask from white at the bottom of the tree to black on the top of the tree, and you can offset this mask, and you can also remap the entire blending to have a more faded blend or a really sharp blend. If you go to the prop shader, the detail settings are slightly different. We saw that on the bark, the vertex color blue is used for detail blending. In this case, we can use the same vertex color blue for the props, and you can also use tools like polybrush to paint the detail mask. If I open polybrush and set it to vertex color painting, in this case everything is painted white. So I will filter the color to only paint on blue and set it to a grayish color. Now I can paint the detail mask. And of course, you can also offset this vertex color or change the blending. Or I can paint back in the blending. The second mode is the projection blending. The projection can be used with a top projection or bottom projection, and again you can offset the projection or remap the blending. The projection blending will always stay on top if the object is rotated, so this is perfect for top blending or bottom blending for rocks if you want to add moss, and that moss should stay on top. The occlusion settings are referring to the vertex occlusion baked in the mask, and it is baked in the vertex color green channel. If I change the color, nothing is happening. That's because if I go to the scene debugger and go to mesh attributes, vertex color green, which is the occlusion, nothing is baked in this mesh. So since we don't have a vertex occlusion mask, let's bake a procedural mask using the prefab converter. If you go to the advanced settings, you will see the occlusion source, which in this case is set to vertex alpha, but we don't have anything in the vertex alpha. So I will change it to procedural, and I will choose a capsule mask, which will add white at the edges of the tree and black in the middle, and hit convert. And now if I go back to the occlusion settings, I can set the occlusion and remap it, so we add a bit of occlusion through this tree. The gradient settings will add two colors based on the vertex alpha, which is a height map, and you can control the colors. and you can remap this gradient. These gradient settings are best used when the albedo texture is white and it works nicely for stylized vegetation. The noise settings can be used to add color variation to the vegetation based on a 3D noise texture. If I set these two colors, we can control the noise scale and remap the noise texture, and you can replace the noise texture under the global control word noise texture. You can use another 3D texture if you want. Emissive settings. In TV, the emissive is using a color texture. You can control the degrees. The emissive baking is used together with the light mapper, but I have no idea how the light mapper handles these flags. You can, of course, change the color, and in TV, all the colors are HDR, so you can also control the intensity of the color. And we have the emissive intensity based on HDRP settings. Globally, you can control the emissive intensity under the global control. And you can also use elements to control the emissive intensity. If, however, for instance, you are using some burning wood under a fireplace, you can set the material under the global settings, the global emissive to 0, so the emissive is always on regardless of the global settings. The perspective settings are specific to the grass shader, and it is used to hide the grass planes when the grass is viewed from the top. You can use the perspective push to push the planes to the screen edges, and the noise to add some noise to the planes. And this effect is only applied when the grass is viewed from the top. When viewed from the side, it will go back to normal, and you can control how fast this transition is happening using the perspective angle. The size fade settings are also specific to the grass shader only, and it can be used to fade out the grass at a specific distance. But please keep in mind that even if the grass is faded out, on the CPU side, the game object is still rendered. So it is better to use the size fade in combination with LOD groups or with third-party culling systems. The motion settings will not be covered in this video because it is covered in another tutorial in greater detail, so let's jump to the advanced settings. The pre-baked pivots are only available for the grass shader, and they will treat each grass plane as an individual object, even this entire grass mesh is a single object. If I disable the pre-baked pivots, you will see that the size fade is happening at the object pivot. But if I enable the pre-baked pivots, each plane is treated as an individual object. You don't have to worry about it. It is baked automatically by the prefab converter. The batching support must be enabled if the mesh is set to static. You need to enable batching support, otherwise the animation will be broken at runtime. The dynamic support is used, for instance, if you add overlay to the scene, that overlay is always staying on top. But if, for instance, you want to cut a tree in the game, you want that snow to stick to the mesh, so you need to enable the dynamic support, and once enabled, the overlay will stick to the mesh. And we have the GPU instancing, which will enable the GPU instancing support on the material. You can copy material settings from different game objects by simply dragging the game object to the copy from game object field. Or you can control the render key from priority to user defined. If you want to see the internal properties for the shader, you can use this toggle and it will show all the internal properties, or all the hidden properties found in the shader, or some additional information about the shader, like shader model, or if it is always rendering forward, and so on. So you probably noticed I left out the subsurface settings. That's because I want to cover the subsurface scattering in greater detail in another video. That's because there are some differences between the built-in render pipeline, URP, and HDRP. Alright, that's it for the shader settings. Don't forget that after any conversion, you might need to adjust the material settings, but you are now a pro in TV shaders. So I hope it was a useful tutorial, and thanks for watching.